To another episode of Women Investing in Women. Robin and I are super thrilled to feature another episode with another impactful conversation. This is all about women coming together and nurturing, collaborating, and co-creating a world that behooves us so that we can step into our power and live our full life knowing we are each created differently, but only together we are going to reach our potential and light up the entire community to shine. So as we get this kicked off, Robin, go ahead and introduce our guest today.
Okay, I am absolutely delighted to have Nicole and Shirley on with us. They are with the YWCA, Young Women's Christian Association, that's what it stands for, in the Glendale and Pasadena area, which is in the Los Angeles area, which is right near where I live. And I originally became acquainted with the YWCA when my daughter's Girl Scout troop needed to do some service projects. And so I, as one of the co-leaders, helped them do service projects for the YWCA. Well, then fast forward many, many years, and I was doing a certification in creating well-being for communities. And one of the projects was creating something for a local organization. And so instantly I thought of the YWCA. So I was able to do some presentations on women creating well-being for the local YWCA and met Nicole and Shirley. And so then when Cass and I started this podcast, it's like, oh my gosh, we have to have the YWCA on and YWCA on. And so glad that Nicole and Shirley. So tell us a little bit about the YWCA and how you got involved with it.
Well, so the YWCA, we are a domestic violence program, intimate partner violence. We work with survivors and their children. And so our program has different facets to it. There is a therapy, mental health department that we are a part of, that we represent. And there's a legal department with a staff attorney. We have a housing department to assist with housing. We have case management. We do have a shelter, a confidentially located shelter as well. So that is really the heart of our programming. We also have a girls empowerment program. And that's not specific to domestic violence survivors, but it is just trying to work with young girls, giving them a lot of life skills and empowering them. And I got involved many years ago, about 5 years ago now, from my friend, actually, who was also a licensed social worker, clinical social worker. And she said, I think you would be so great. And she was about to vacate her position and she wanted me to apply. And she really encouraged me. And that's how I got here. And I've been here ever since. And I've really loved it. So.
And so I started with the YWCA as an intern from Pepperdine, and I happened to go to one of the breakfasts. It's the Women's Empowerment Breakfast, and met Nicole there and met Tara there. And then I onboarded. And then after almost 4 years now, I'm also one of the therapists here, and we provide the services such as the groups and individual therapy and family therapy for the survivors of domestic violence.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing both your journey and what your YWCA is doing in your local community. I grew up all the way in another part of the world in Sri Lanka, in South Asia. And as I was growing up, it was like the Gaza Strip. I grew up in the middle of a genocidal war. And while school and everything was available, you could get everywhere as long as you lived through it. We also had local YWCAs, but those were places where we as young girls went to learn crafts and in our own way pretend like life was normal. right? Everything around you is blowing up. And yet you can learn to make fabric flowers. You can learn to make stuffed toys. You learn to do these things because you can't buy any of that in the middle of a war zone, but you can make it. I remember making flowers for my neighbor's wedding with fabric. And she specifically wanted poinsettias to pretend like it was winter. We don't have winter. So everybody got to live their dream through crafts and make believe. And YWCA enabled that. So as I look back at how much value YWCA brings in, and it's not a religious thing, right? We're a Hindu Buddhist country, but YWCA was there. What impact are you seeing the organization creating in a meaningful way to make this world a better place?
Well, I think, so every YWCA has a different program. So you could go to YWCA in another city, another country, and they'll all be different. But I do think the focus and the premise is the same, where they want to empower women, work with girls, young girls, and just trying to help them have their best life possible. So us focusing on intimate partner violence survivors, domestic violence survivors, and their families and children, we are seeing people who are in crisis, some having fled their homes, leaving with nothing. They have their children and maybe small belongings. And so it really is, we're meeting them at a very traumatic time. And we have to always be aware of that. And just trying to help them with this new start, if that's what they want. We always will default to what they would like to do. Sometimes they do end up going back to, that previous relationship that was abusive and unhealthy, but we still will support them in whatever way that we, in whatever way that we can.
Yeah. And, for them to just have a space when they come in is really important. A lot of these women really don't talk about the trauma that is happening. A lot of them don't really know what domestic violence is besides the physical aspect of it. But, there is, emotional and psychological and financial and religious. And so having a space where the women can unite together, having a space where we can kind of provide them these resources and share the psychoeducation behind what domestic violence is, and just meeting them where they're at, because at that, once they're here, it's the trust level is very, very low. And so all of us here meet the clients where they're at, basically.
That is such a beautiful story and a beautiful mission. And I'm wondering, what are some of the, if there's some commonalities, what are some of the first things that you do with women when they, come to seek your services? And then how does that change as they recover and as they progress? So like, how do you initially help a woman who's first coming in? And then how does that empowering and help shift as they move along?
So when they first come in, like Shirley is saying, I think the trust is really difficult because of a lot of the situations they've been in. Sometimes they've had interactions with other, big entities or agencies. It might be, law enforcement. It might be the Department of Children and Family Services. And depending on how those interactions have gone, their trust may really vary. So I think first and foremost, we try to create that space so they can trust us, so they can feel like they can organize what their priorities and what their needs are, because sometimes you don't even know what to do. You're in this state of shock. You're like I said, they've come from a traumatic, typically experience, and it's that lost feeling. And so really allowing them to breathe, to see what the priorities are, and asking them, what would you like? What do you envision? And so it's getting those basic needs met first, the housing, do they need to try to get a job, childcare? Those are typically the first things that we have to tackle when they come in, is just finding out what their basic needs are. If they have court, do they need to get help from our attorney? Do they need to file a restraining order? Do they need to file for divorce? Do they need to fight for child custody? All these things are happening at the same time. And so really trying to help them organize their thoughts and their feelings. That's what happens in individual therapy, if they would like that service. And then in groups, it's what Shirley was talking about, that camaraderie, hearing from other women, I think, is also very powerful. And so they can learn from other women's experiences as well, and not feel that they're the only one going through this, that they're completely alone. I think another thing is for them to know they're not alone in this. Yes, they have to walk the walk, and this is their journey, but that they don't have to do it completely by themselves without any support.
Yeah. And another really important thing here is, and it's our goal, is to help these women with their identity. Their identities is completely stripped when they're here, right? Because they're vigilant, and there's a lot of, the codependency because of fear, because of safety. And so when they have the moment to unite together, you see a lot of times that they are actually empowering each other too, which is so beautiful. And we've seen, again, it's just like everybody's journey and experience takes time. And but there's that moment where these women start really paying attention to themselves, using the resources, being aware of their trauma, being aware of their triggers, having, at least the opportunity, if they'd like Nicole said, to have that individual therapy, to where it's a private space for them, and everything they're saying is confidential. And so they get to process all of that and reflect. And with all the resources that we have at the YWCA, they are, they can, when they're ready, to kind of move forward from that.
That is such invaluable work you're doing. And at that point of crisis, at that pivotal moment, to be there for the women is so, so vital. So thank you for the service you do, personally as professionals, as well as a YWCA community. What's coming up for me as both of you are talking is a lot of times women stay in relationships because of financial situations.
Yes.
I have befriended women over the years. I have a friend who actually had her husband took a hammer and tried to kill her with it and took her eye out. To this day, she wears an eye patch, and she wrote a book about being a one-eyed witness to her own abuse, right? Wow. And so women go through this because of financial dependencies. And what this woman and I do is we actually do a jewelry business introduction to women so that they can start selling jewelry. And so they get to look pretty, feel pretty, and become thriving entrepreneurs, and then use that money to give the confidence to move out, because now they're empowered. And some of these women are mothers and grandmothers, and they're getting their children, daughters involved, right? So I am very, very keen in understanding, and for our audience to understand, how big is that financial burden, the financial dependency, and what does YWCA do? But beyond that, what can we as men and women in the community help? Because when women are not abused, and they're not afraid, and they're not withdrawn like that, the whole family thrives, therefore the society thrives. So it's in our collective interest to change the trajectory. How can we partner with YWCA or this group of women to make that possible?
So I think you're absolutely correct. We have been talking more and more about the financial aspect, because that is one of the biggest barriers to being able to leave the relationship. And also just, them thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to be on my own? And sometimes we do have, people coming in through our doors who don't know how to open a bank account, don't know how to manage money because they've never been allowed to, right? So it is starting from the beginning, but we do have resources. We do, work with them to try to get them to that point because we understand it is so important. First thing is we do try to help them find employment, through our various resources and referrals, or just encouraging them or assisting the case managers working with them. Finding employment is one of the key things for them to gain that financial security and to have that belief that they can do it. They are willing and able and capable. The other thing is housing. Housing is so huge. Housing is so expensive, right? So expensive for even us who have stable jobs, education, and, people who have less resources than that, it's even more difficult. And you have a lot of times dependents. And so the housing is one of the largest, aspects of them becoming independent as well, because it leads into the financial. So our housing department is so important. And all of the women who come into our shelter, we do try to assist them getting transitional housing. Transitional housing is really important because they're there for a longer period of time. Ours is just a temporary shelter, so we can't keep them for a long period of time. Transitional housing allows them to stay there for longer periods of time, and the whole premise is to get them on their feet, to allow them to hopefully, gain employment and to save money. And so later on, they will be able to get their own independent housing on their own. The other really, really helpful thing that we have had access to is emergency housing vouchers that are specifically for domestic violence survivors. And those are issued through the city. So that relationship with the city of Glendale has been extremely important for us and our participants, our clients. These vouchers supplement the rent up to 70%. And if you continue to renew them, it could be a lifetime. So that stability in housing allows someone to see the possibility that they could be living independently on their own, because before that, the thought is so daunting. And it's really understandable why that would just seem like too difficult to achieve. Now, of course, there is the process of applying, but that's what our housing department, our case managers really assist with. And I think also, like Shirley was talking about earlier, the psychoeducation. Sometimes people don't realize that there was financial abuse, that they just thought that maybe that was normal, or, my partner took care of that because they cared. But usually it's for control, it's for power, and it's to keep the abused person in a position where they're not going to be able to easily leave. So it's encouraging them to educate themselves too about that stuff, which they are able to do here. And then I think once they are armed with that knowledge, it's better for them to be able to take the next steps that they would like to take.
And I also wanted to add, let's kind of like not forget the undocumented women too, right? And so there's a lot of fear, and they're alone a lot of the times. Their families aren't here, and they are really just depending on their abuser for the basic needs, right? And so like if we can help them with those basic needs and give them tools and empower them and encourage them, then they're more open to kind of taking that road by themselves. And then the other question that you asked was, how can everybody else kind of help, or this community at least? I think if I could say one thing, it would be empathy, right? Have empathy. There's a lot of women that want to leave and share their stories, and the response that they receive is, well, why don't you just leave? Right. And so it's not that easy. And maybe these women just want to have space to have a conversation. And there is, like the YWCA, other places that really do help the women, the survivors and victims of domestic violence and their children. And so just if we have the knowledge about and the resources, then we can pass them out, right? And we can share the knowledge with them. But empathy goes a long way when you are working and trying to empower victims and survivors of domestic violence.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I heard a couple of what I believe keywords: identity, and then belief, believing that they can do something positive for themselves. What is the work that you do in helping them, individually and collectively develop the mindset that I can change my life? I have power over my life. I can make good choices for myself. How do you create that shift in mindset from being abused to saying, yes, I was abused, and now I am changing and I'm taking power or creating power?
Sure. I think, again, it's like first we meet them, right, where they're at. Everybody's journey is so very different. And, self-compassion, right? When I'm doing individual therapy with them, self-compassion is one of the first things that I really want to talk to them about. I want to learn where their stressors are or what their triggers are and just kind of process through that. And, kind of help them build a relationship with themselves. And that's how they kind of tap into their identities. Some of these women have been in relationships for like 30 years, right? And so can you imagine how much of their identity they have lost? And it's really taking those baby steps, meeting them where they're at and helping them kind of, rebuild that relationship, getting to know themselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicole and Shirley. It's amazing how time flies. You have given us a lot of food for thought and definitely call to action for empathy and understanding without judging them based on our own life, because their life is different. So as we wrap this up, I really want our audience to have a way to get a hold of you, the YWCA. So can you please share with us how that's possible?
Yes. So we do have a 24-hour hotline. And that number is 888-999-7511. So 888-999-7511. If someone is just looking for has questions about services, if they would like to see if there's an opening in our shelter, that number is for everything. And they will get assistance through that number to all of the services that we provide, even if it's not an emergency, but it is a 24-hour number for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time to have this conversation. I, as an immigrant woman, already know the challenges in transitioning.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the luxury of being educated and professional. And I can imagine when that challenges I faced compounded by the lack of professional qualifications, experience, and education, and a language barrier. Sometimes it feels unsurmountable. So I truly want to echo your message, and our call to action to the women is just reach out and empathetically lift the other woman, right? It's not our place to judge because we have not walked a mile in their shoe. But if the roles were reversed, we would hope to God that somebody would stand up for us, right? So as we bring this to a close, my call to action to our entire Women Investing in Women community is this is not just about business and empowerment from an economic perspective. This is truly life and family affirming as well. So look, we only find what we look for, right? Like the red car theory. Look for opportunities that we can help lift women up from where they are to where they need to be in order to be safe. And in the process, let's build a community of women who really are compassionate, empathetic, and have grace for themselves and the women around them.